Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show. Happy Thursday, everybody. Leftists are currently working their way through the 5 stages of grief after Donald Trump handily stomped Kamala Harris and her campaign in a total blowout. This thing wasn't even close. Not only did Donald Trump win the Electoral College with 295 votes to Harris's 226, that's not even counting Arizona and Nevada, by the way, which have not technically been called yet, but are leaning heavily red, so Trump is likely going to take those too. Not only that, but Trump also won the popular vote by several million, which means that liberals can't even kick and scream about how this election was rigged and stolen by the Electoral College. That's their favorite crutch to lean on in a presidential election when they lose. But they can't do that this time. And that is super duper hard for them right now, because not only are they grappling with their loss because Trump won more states than they did, they're actually having to come to terms with the fact that more people, not just more states, more people, more actual human beings in this country decided that they would rather go with Trump than elect Harris, who the left spent the past 2 months, because that's all she had to campaign for after she was handpicked to succeed Joe Biden. She didn't even have to make it through the primary process. She spent 2 months campaigning. 2 months. They spent 2 months telling us that we had to vote for her because she was black and a woman. And that's pretty much all they gave anybody. And they weren't counting on millions upon millions of Americans deciding that things like, I don't know, their ability to pay their bills and masses of illegal aliens clogging up their cities and their schools, those things were a little bit more important than the fact that Harris has a uterus. Or at least we think that she does, because quite frankly, the left can't even tell us what a woman is at this point unless they're trying to say that we should vote for one, or else we're all sexist. That's the only time, literally the only time that the left can tell you when a woman what a woman is when they are demanding that you vote for somebody because she's a woman. Other than that, they can't even define a woman. And this is not going so well. It's really not going so well for the left. The collective hysteria that I have witnessed on social media, and not just from like random people on the internet. This is not just trolls and people on X and Instagram who make a name for themselves by saying wild and crazy things. I'm talking about people that I know. People in my life, people in my circle. I'm sure you have too. Millions of Chicken Littles are suddenly screaming that the sky is falling and we're all doomed, and they're running around making the most outlandish claims and spewing some of the most vile mess at anybody who may have voted differently than them. It's been shocking, frankly. It's been a little terrifying because it turns out there are a whole mess of really, really crazy people out there. And that's disconcerting because we're all sharing the highway with these people. But it's also pretty hilarious. I'm not going to lie. The first stage of grief, of course, is denial, which is not just a river in Egypt. It's also a house in which many leftists are currently squatting. And apparently they're completely aware of their own hypocrisy here, as they usually are. So now flashback with me, if you will, right? So it's 2020. And Joe Biden has just been declared the winner of the presidential election with a historically unprecedented 80 million votes plus, which even leftists are currently trying to figure out, by the way, because the math between then and now is... Anyway, the Trump campaign immediately questioned the legitimacy of this election, right? Because there were rampant claims of fraud and sketchy mail-in ballot rules, and there were ballot harvesting schemes, and then you had some kind of odd things happening on election night, and videos coming out saying that certain polling places were having trouble. And there was a lot of concern, and quite frankly, rightfully so, because right before the election, the left had scrambled to change election rules to benefit themselves, and they used a pandemic to justify it. If there's one thing that leftists tend to have, if there's one thing that the Democrats tend to have a little more trouble with than Republicans, it is election day turnout. That is one area where they do struggle compared to Republicans. And using the pandemic, using COVID and public health as an excuse, they were permitting mail-in ballots well past election day in some states. Other states were allowing ballot harvesting in the name of protecting public safety. And of course, that leaves an election open to all kinds of fraud. There was some pretty unprecedented sketchiness happening. Now, again, I'm not making a case right now for or against whether the election was rigged, whether it was just manipulated, whether it was tinkered with. I mean, we can talk about, media interference and the censorship of information, but there were a lot of questions surrounding the election in 2020. But the left, who were absolutely pissing themselves in excitement over the possibility of getting rid of the evil orange man, declared any question as to the legitimacy of that election was an attack on democracy and a threat to the future of this entire nation. And then you fast forward to this past Tuesday when Donald Trump retook the presidency, not only by winning the Electoral College, but the popular vote as well, including turning out higher than expected numbers of Latinos, Blacks, Native Americans, and women. And suddenly, with the flip of a switch, we weren't supposed to notice it, but leftists are now convinced that this whole entire thing was rigged and it should be scrapped as illegitimate. And it has been amazing to watch this in real time. And yet, I mean, we've got liberal activists who are outright claiming that this election was rigged because suddenly they can't figure out how Joe Biden got 80 million votes in 2020 and Harris only got like 67 million votes this year. Suddenly they think that the 2020 numbers look a little bit weird in comparison to 2016 and 2024. Fancy that. Amazing stuff here. Here's one guy saying the election results should be investigated and that the media were part of it, which was my favorite part, by the way. The media were in the tank for Donald Trump. My golly, the delusion that you have to be under to say some of this stuff. But he says that the election results should be investigated and that Kamala should not have conceded until the whole thing could be recounted. He says, and this is Jaros Eichhorn, by the way. He's got like 73,000 followers over on X. And this racked up 414,000 likes. And that's as of Wednesday. So it's probably got more at this point. Here's what he said. Who else is highly suspicious about the outcome of this election and thinks there should be an investigation into it? Also, Kamala Harris should refuse to concede because of that much-needed investigation. Face it, there were just too many split-ticket voters, which, by the way, really doesn't happen that often, for this election to be legit. Also, don't forget Trump's rally sizes were diminishing daily. Meanwhile, hers were electric and overflowing with enthusiasm. Who else believes that something fishy is going on and that the mainstream media is complicit? Really? Really? Oh my gosh, you guys, the cognitive dissonance here, if leftists didn't have double standards, they would have no standards at all. And the craziest part is that they genuinely, honest to Pete, do not see it in themselves. It is like the most unreal set of blinders on these morons. Pam Keith, who's a lawyer and the CEO of the Center for Employment Justice, questioned how 16 million votes, which is roughly the number of votes that Harris lacked versus Biden's win in 2020, that's roughly the difference, could have evaporated. She's apparently missing the possibility that some Biden voters went for Trump or that some people just didn't vote for Kamala. Here's what she said, quote, "This means she should have won. She didn't lose any group substantially, but somehow 16 million votes evaporated during a higher turnout election." Well, even if you don't get into some of the bigger claims of election rigging in 2020, even if you don't go quite that far, maybe, and I'm just offering this as a possibility here, maybe the fact that the left couldn't take advantage of a pandemic and couldn't go door to door harvesting ballots the way that they could 4 years ago, maybe that had something to do with it. I'm just saying. Maybe when you actually have to convince people to support you, you actually have to convince people to buy into your agenda to the point where they turn up to the polls and vote for you. Maybe that's a little bit more difficult than going to their door, registering them, getting them to fill out a ballot, and then taking it to the polling place for them. Just saying. Just saying. But somehow to these fools, the math doesn't add up. Somehow the left thinks that something's fishy and say they think that this one's not on the up and up. And I'm given to understand here now, given the no small amount of screaming that I've had to listen to from these mentally deficient, intellectually obtuse dingbats here for the last 4 years, that this kind of nonsense is a blatant attack on democracy and a threat to our nation. That's what I've been told. Your rules, not mine. Your rules. You are not allowed to question election results. You are not allowed to say that something is funky and, you don't believe this just because you lost. You're not allowed to question the math or the rules or the turnout. And if you do, you are a fascist. You are a fascist. Or does that only apply when conservatives do it? And I think we all know the answer to that question, right? Other leftists shifted very quickly into the second and their preferred stage of grief, which is anger. There's been no shortage of that over on the interwebs either, and it's actually been pretty funny to watch. Apparently not realizing that this is largely what got them into this mess in the first place. The left has doubled down on their insults in the wake of Donald Trump securing his second term in office. And now they're blaming everything from racism and sexism, which are the usual culprits, to uneducated hicks for why Kamala Harris is not doing a victory dance this week. One person over on X, who managed to get over 300,000 likes for this, called rural Trump supporters inbred children of the corn. As far as insults go, I actually kind of like that one. I don't know. Should we get t-shirts made up or something? Inbred children of the corn. This person said, quote, "I'm so sick of the 6 inbred children of the corn deciding if we live or die. Abolish the electoral college." This one has got some serious irony in it, folks, because apparently this dimwit is too uneducated herself to understand, A, what the electoral college is for, and the fact that it's actually fantastic. It protects the entire country from being run by some coastal elites who wouldn't know an irrigation ditch if they fell into one, and who think that electricity comes from the magical fairies that live behind their sheetrock. And here she is calling rural Americans inbred idiots. Hilarious. You can't make this stuff up. Of course, the left is also blaming sexism. Here's Democrat Senator Claire McCaskill on MSNBC right after the election, saying that Harris lost because she's a woman and a black one at that.
And I think when you actually analyze the data, what you're going to see is there was more enthusiasm in the rural areas of Virginia than there was for Biden. I mean, I think we need to start saying out loud that, what is different between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? Everybody thinks they're exactly the same on policies, but one is a woman of color and the other is a white man that everybody was really comfortable with.
By the way, can we just say this is the laziest political strategy that I think I have ever witnessed from either side, and we have had some doozies. I mean, just continuing to blame everything on racism and sexism is, it smacks of either a cognitive, intellectual inability or a complete unwillingness to take a step back and look at anything else that you might have done that failed to connect to voters. Lobbing insults at people. And it's interesting, too, because I wonder if the left realizes this, and we're going to get to some more of this in just a minute, which tells me that they don't. They've already branded conservatives racist and sexist, right? That ship has sailed. That's why you should not care. You should not care one iota if some liberal or some Democrat on television or whatever, some media talking head calls you a racist or a sexist, because they've already made up their minds that is exactly what you are if you are a conservative. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter the color of your own skin or your own gender. You are automatically a racist and a sexist. But it's interesting because when they say that they lost some of their own voters, people that they were depending on to vote for Kamala Harris, and then blaming racism and sexism, what you're essentially saying is our own party, our own people, our own demographic, our own electorate are racist and sexist. That's pretty insulting to you, don't you think? And I'm not sure that it's doing a whole lot of good in making up ground with the people that you're trying to win over, to say that the only reason that they didn't go with your plan, that they didn't go with your person, is because they hate women and they hate black people. I'm not sure that's going to do you a whole lot of favors. It certainly hasn't worked every other time you've screamed it. An MSNBC analyst actually said on live TV here, that Harris lost because millions of abjectly racist people could not deal with the fact that she was a black woman who was married to a white man.
But I also have a question about the role that race and gender played in these results. Here are the facts. If we would pull back the layers, she is a person of color, she is a she, and she is in an interracial marriage. And I wonder, I have this question mark in my mind over whether all of those things combined was too much for pockets of this country.
Yes, because that's the problem. That's the problem. It couldn't have been that Kamala Harris has been in charge of the border now for several years and hasn't done diddly squat, and we've been overrun by illegal aliens. It couldn't possibly be because inflation is sky high, no matter how much they scream at us that the economy is actually doing fantastic. But people are looking at their Costco bills and going, yeah, well, that's great that you're saying that, but I'm still paying 25% more for like everything. It couldn't possibly be because we're now implicated in multiple foreign wars that weren't happening several years ago. It couldn't be because any of this other stuff. It must be because people cannot wrap their brains around a black woman being married to a white man, even though that is happening all across the country and nobody ever has a problem with it, except for this one time? What lazy garbage. Of course, other people just screamed into their phones. Here's one woman having a totally normal one.
I'm sorry. No! Why? Why? Do you really hate me that bad?
Dear Lord in heaven, honestly, I have been on the losing end of elections before. I got to tell you, I woke up in 2008. I woke up in 2012. I woke up in 2020, pretty sick to my stomach. And a lot of non-presidential elections in between. Not happy, very frustrated with all of my friends who were celebrating like they had just won the Super Bowl personally. And there I am trying to do the math and figure out how many elections we've got to have like that until we start having to form breadlines. I have been upset and I have been highly worried over an election before. And I've had a lot of those fears confirmed, by the way. The last 4 years are a great example of that. But I have never once had the urge to open up my camera app and just scream mindlessly and then post it to the internet. I think you have reached a very special level of delusional to do that. Either that or you are really so narcissistic and so attention starved that you're doing it because you want to be an internet meme. Those are the only two explanations I can come up with for these people. Genuine mental illness or an extreme pathological need for attention. It's got to be one or the other because it certainly isn't sanity. Others went all in to blame everybody who didn't vote for Harris as racist, including minorities. Amazing. MSNBC's Joe Scarborough had one of multiple meltdowns in which he claimed that Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump because Latinos hate black people and black men hate women.
I just say really quickly, too, Democrats need to be mature and they need to be honest. And they need to say, yes, there's misogyny. But it's not just misogyny from white men. Mm-hmm. It's misogyny from Hispanic men.
Right.
It's misogyny from black men. Things we've all been talking about who do not want a woman leading them. Might be race issues with Hispanics. They don't want a black woman as president of the United States.
Amazing. Amazing. It is amazing that the left thinks that it is the height of racism and insulting behavior to make a joke about Puerto Rico's well-documented trash problem, but somehow it's not racist or insulting to say that Latinos hate black people or that black men are, as a group, sexist. Somehow that's okay? They cannot wrap their brains around the fact that their strategy of playing identity politics, their reliance on the fact that their candidate was a woman and black rather than a solid candidate with good policy proposals, that didn't work. It is inconceivable to leftists that anybody would vote for something other than race and gender. That is the only explanation they have, the only thing that their feeble, tiny, chickpea-sized brains can grab onto for why Harris failed to connect with Americans across all walks of life, across all demographics. The only thing they can think of is it must be because she was black and a woman, because that's the only reason that they gave anybody for why they should vote for her in the first place. David Axelrod over on CNN said that racism and sexism are clearly why Harris lost, and anybody who thinks that that isn't true is wrong.
Let's be honest about this, okay? Let's be absolutely blunt about it. There were appeals to racism in this campaign, and there is racial bias in this country, and there is sexism in this country, and anybody who thinks that that did not in any way impact on the outcome of this race is wrong.
Well, okay, then. We'll just have to take your word for it. You say that we're all racist and sexist, and I guess that just saying it makes it true? Of course, there were also those who said that Trump must have been elected because people just don't care about democracy. Over on CBS, Robert Costa said that many voters of all persuasions must view January 6th differently than he does, because if they were willing to elect Donald Trump again, they just must not care anything about democracy, because apparently democratically electing somebody means that voters rejected democracy. By making their voices heard in a free and fair election, wherein they were able to vote for whoever they wanted, voters were supporting tyranny. Can somebody do the math on that one for me? Because I am trying so hard to make it make sense, and it makes the kind of sense that doesn't. Nothing about that is logical. This is the inane rambling of people who have lost touch with reality to the point where they are hallucinating Nazis. They are imagining the bootsteps of the Gestapo. It's like mass schizophrenia or something. At this point, I'm becoming more and more convinced that many on the left have a bizarre and disturbing fetish for cosplaying like they live in the Warsaw Ghetto or something. Like they've romanticized the Holocaust, or the Soviet bloc, or North Korean gulags, and they actually want to live there because they want to play a hero or something. It's sick. It's really demented. Like the people who seem to get excited over COVID, even though people were losing their businesses and they couldn't work and pay their bills and their loved ones were dying alone in nursing homes. But you had these leftists who were so wrapped up in this weird contagion fantasy, like they were getting to live out a zombie apocalypse video game or something so they could feel heroic. It's bizarre. It's deeply unhealthy. Other leftists have already moved on to the third stage of grief, which is bargaining. This woman took to TikTok to claim, stay with me here because this one gets good, Joe Biden should step down, hand over the keys to the Oval Office to Kamala Harris, who should then declare that letting Donald Trump assume the presidency goes against the Constitution, and that she will remain president until another election can be held.
Okay, but for real though, Joe Biden could actually save us from a Donald Trump presidency. Yes, you're seeing this after the election results. It is 100% possible for Joe Biden to step down and make Kamala Harris the 47th president, and claim that making Donald Trump president would go against the oath of upholding the Constitution. Therefore, a new election has to take place, and Kamala Harris will be the president until then.
Now, in addition to being so patently absurd that it's almost painful, that's literally the exact opposite of the democratic election process that leftists have spent the last 4 years screaming in defense of. But now they want to throw their own rule book out the window because they lost, and suddenly it's okay to deny elections again and even refuse to respect the peaceful transfer of power. The vapid shrews over on The View, who I actually voluntarily watched, by the way, on Wednesday. I think that's the first time in years that I've done that. We actually have some of my colleagues over at Newsbusters are forced as part of their jobs to earn their paycheck to watch The View. I highly urge you, by the way, highly urge you to follow Nicholas Fondacaro on X on social media. If you can, go to newsbusters.org and look at his work. He has to watch The View every day, so please keep him in your prayers. Please keep him in your prayers. He's done it for years, and I do not understand how he has any shred of sanity left, frankly. But he actually breaks down the highlights, or rather the lowlights of it, and puts them out for public consumption. So you don't have to watch The View in order to enjoy the hilarity and the meltdowns that happen over there on a daily basis if you follow his work. I actually voluntarily watched The View on Wednesday just because I wanted to watch the tears. I wanted to sop them up with a biscuit. And let me tell you what, they were absolutely delicious. They were. And the vapid shrews over on The View are now demanding that the government censor free speech to keep anything like this from ever happening again, because that's the problem, according to the left. Or, the problem is people being able to freely share their opinions and information without the government and the liberal media feeding it to them, because we can't have people just like saying things out there in public willy-nilly. We can't have them just sharing their opinions and sharing information or asking questions. For democracy or something. Here's the idiots over on The View blaming Elon Musk for letting people exercise free speech on social media.
Finland, kids in nursery school are learning to discern between fake news and real news. Yeah. They should be teaching that in this country. Yeah. Teach children tolerance. Teach them to think critically.
Well, it would help if we could regulate social media, because one of the biggest offenders is D.C. and Congress have not been able to do one thing in regard to the rogue corporations of social media.
It's not going to get any better with Elon Musk now in the administration.
So now that's the new game. Let's change the rules. Let's make sure that we work the system to ensure that nobody ever gets elected again that we don't like. Let's make sure that nobody can say things that we don't like, that no information that we don't approve of can get out there. Let's make sure that we pump people full of what we want them to believe, and that they're not allowed to discuss it and they're not allowed to question it publicly. We're going to shut down any avenue that people have to share information that we have not cherry-picked and hand-fed to them. For democracy. For democracy. I love that. It's always for democracy. We must implement censorship and government control and media propaganda for democracy. Other liberals have accepted defeat, and they have moved on to the depression stage of grief, which has provided also no shortage of hilarity on the internet. Nothing to see here, by the way, just another leftist having a totally normal one. Although, to be fair, this particularly unhinged loony may have taken the cake on post-Trump election meltdowns, which is really saying something, given that the internet is currently filled with people having all-out panic attacks and sob fests and temper tantrums over Trump's whim. Kudos for this lady. It takes a lot to rise to the top here. But this woman apparently is afraid to go to sleep because she thinks she's going to wake up a slave. And no, this is not a joke. I very much wish that it were, because again, we've got to share the freeway with these fools. Here's this woman.
Yo, I'm scared to go to sleep. I might wake up a motherfucking slave. Y'all, like, why are y'all Trump supporters? Like, why? Why are y'all Trump supporters? Like, why is this a thing right now? Why is this okay? I can't do this no more. I should have kept my vote to myself because I knew it didn't fucking matter. I knew it didn't.
Which begs an even bigger question. How exactly does one get to this level of deluded? I want to know, is this what your brain looks like if it just like sits in a puddle of MSNBC goo for years on end and just marinates? By the way, here's one possible answer to her question, if she's willing to put down the crazy for just a minute and listen. Maybe people voted for Trump because nobody with a shred of common sense thinks anybody is going to wake up a slave under his presidency, but they sure as heck knew that their grocery prices were going to keep going up under Harris's. Maybe, just maybe. So maybe stop being scared of bad things that are never going to happen to you and start being a little more concerned about things that actually could. Like socialism. And the problem is this hysteria, this paralyzing fear over absolutely ridiculous nonsense. This is not just relegated to a few fools over on Instagram. There are millions of people all across this country who have saturated themselves with hysterical left-wing media who have pumped their brains so full of lies from people like Rachel Maddow and Joy Reid and Whoopi Goldberg and all of these walking anal orifices over on TV, they actually believe this stuff. I've got a friend of mine who reached out to me the day after the election, genuinely panicking. I mean, in actual honest to God fear. And she knows me and she knows what I believe and she knows where I work and what I do. And she knows that I follow the news and politics very closely. And she reached out to me, literally asking me to talk her off a ledge because she had worked herself up into this state of terror that was paralyzing her. And she was trying to figure out if any of it was based in reality because she needed it to stop so she could go about her day. And she actually believes, and I know this sounds absolutely crazy to a lot of us, I get that, but she actually believes that starting on January 20th, women are going to be jailed for having miscarriages. She actually believes that because that's what people like Mika Brzezinski over on MSNBC have told her. When Mika Brzezinski says Donald Trump is literally killing women, which she has actually said, and that might sound absolutely insane to us, but millions of women hear that lie and they actually believe it. I was contacted by another friend who, believe it or not, actually thinks, crap you not, actually thinks that white supremacists are so rampant in this country that starting on January 20th, they are going to re-implement Jim Crow, which apparently she doesn't even realize was the Democrats in the first place. But she actually believes that black people and minorities are going to become second-class citizens. She actually believes that there's a good chance women could lose their voting rights because people like Oprah Winfrey told her so. She actually believes that Donald Trump is going to start rounding up immigrants, not just illegal aliens, not just criminals who murder people and gang members, but legal immigrants, Muslim Americans, and put them in camps and deport them. People actually believe this stuff. Because as crazy as it sounds, as insane and ridiculous as it sounds, and it does, this is so outlandish that it absolutely defies description. But this is the kind of stuff that the leftist media have told people. This is why places like X are so crucial. I truly believe that without places like X, without free speech platforms, without places like the Media Research Center, where we have worked tirelessly for over 35 years to expose the left-wing media and their garbage. And we're seeing the effects of that exposure now in real time, where public trust in the media has fallen to all-time lows, thank God. And the truth is finally being shared on free speech platforms like X and Rumble, where people can share information freely. That is so crucial because otherwise, the American public, people like my friends, are at the mercy of whatever the left-wing propaganda machine wants to brainwash them with. And I can only hope that she and millions of hysterical, terrified people that are genuinely, in honest to God, fear for their lives right now over ridiculousness, or those that are so filled with anger and hate and who are lashing out at anyone and everyone right now. I can only hope that they finally reach the final stage of grief, which is acceptance, and not just acceptance of the results of the election, okay? Not just the acceptance that we're going to have Trump as president for the next 4 years, but acceptance of truth, acceptance of fact. Acceptance of the fact that you have been lied to for years now. I'm not asking you to suddenly, become a conservative and agree with everything that conservatives believe. I'm not suddenly asking you to suddenly pitch everything that you value or that you believe in and do a 180. That would be fantastic because I think that you're wrong. But that's not what I'm asking for here. I am asking for people to accept that we have to come back to being rooted in reality here. And not fictitious, apocalyptic, doomsday scenarios that the left-wing media has been feeding people. No, the earth is not going to catch fire over climate change in the next 6 months or whatever. How many doomsday apocalypses have come and gone? How many dates have we missed where we were all supposed to be dead at this point and it didn't happen? Roe versus Wade was overturned quite a while ago, and women are not bleeding out in the streets. It's not happening. And leftists also need to accept the fact that Americans did not reject Kamala Harris because she is black or a woman, or because we are all just super excited about the prospect of women having to tromp around in handmade robes. What ridiculous nonsense. Americans voted for Donald Trump because they can't afford their groceries. They do not want their child given porn in the classroom, which is happening, by the way. We have the receipts. They're concerned that crime is skyrocketing in their neighborhood that used to be safe. They are concerned that their city and their town and their country is collapsing under the weight of supporting millions of illegal aliens who are streaming into this country with no end in sight. They are concerned that we've got about a story a day of some woman who's been found raped and murdered because somebody who was not supposed to be in this country in the first place was allowed in, given a taxpayer-funded hotel room, and then off and killed somebody. They are worried that we are funding endless wars overseas while they can't pay their light bill. They are worried that they can't afford to buy a home, but they're expected to pay for somebody else's art degree. And guess what? They are allowed to care about all of that. They are not required in a free country to prioritize your devotion to abortion or the fact that the Democrat candidate is black and a woman over what is best for them and their family. And guess what? That is called democracy. You want to know what democracy looks like? You just watched it. And with that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show for today. Thank you so much for being with me. I'll see you guys back here next Thursday. In the meantime, head over to Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show. You won't ever miss an episode that way. Also, make sure you subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast with Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That one's with Tim Graham. Absolutely hilarious stuff. They watch the news, so you don't have to, but you still get all the craziness and you get to laugh at it. So we've got lots of stuff for you to fill up your phone with, fill up your laptop with, wherever you listen to your podcasts. In the meantime, I will see you back here next Thursday. I hope you have a fantastic weekend and a blessed week ahead.